let's talk about identification, the understanding of it. We could go deep into it, but just the parameters of it.
And wait, when you say identification, you're referring to kind of social conditioning or?
Yeah, social conditioning. But, what we learn is, and I'm going to take it just onto myself and tell the story from there. So this is how I perceive it and look at it. Okay. And as I started, so when I had an identification of something, this me and this is who I am, I was raised this way. And, it's actually funny. I heard somebody say this. Human beings aren't raised. You raise cattle. You raise chickens. You develop human beings. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. You don't
truly, though.
But, identification, we actually narrow the field. And that's what it is. We have a very limited understanding of identification. So when we limit the identification, what we identify to is we don't expand and learn more from other cultures and other people. But I feel the object is to expand at your own pace.
So wait, what you're saying is we identify and kind of create this idea of who we are, and we stay stuck within that, right?
All right, so I identify myself with this is who I am, this is how I was raised.
Okay.
I used to box. I
this
used to
race,
do this.
I'm this religion.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, I'm from this culture.
Yeah, and so when we go to expand the identification, it doesn't mean you wipe any of that stuff out. I still box. I still did all that other stuff. But what I do is I expand it to other fields and I start to identify with other cultures and other people because we really can. We could identify with the world, and actually we could get to the point where we identify with the whole universe, right? As we find out there's this alien or extraterrestrial species out there, we could learn to identify with them. But let's just stick with this planet right now. Cool. But as we inch away and start to expand identification, so if I only identify with a certain type of food, I have to disassociate from another food. And there's nothing really learned or gained there. And especially when we're dealing with each other as human beings, as I identify, actually, in expanding my identification, I also expand my intellect. Because if I don't expand my identification onto other things and see the correlation between me and another human being, all of a sudden, my intellect becomes my enemy and the enemies of others, because now I have to defend them intellectually and I don't expand. But the truth is, as I become more intellect, I realize I really know nothing. And I'm not just saying that from a great quote or whatever. I really realize I don't know. So even what we're talking about here, as I explain identification is something, I'm sure somebody will make a comment and have their take on it. And their take is right, but it doesn't make mine wrong, and I'm not making theirs wrong either. It's just how I'm expressing right now as we're sitting here on the show. But as I do know personally, when I expand my identification, and what it is I step back from it. I'm not completely disassociated from it, but I'm looking at it from a different vantage point. What is creating the identity? Where's the energy coming from the identity? And that's when I'm putting space between the I am in me and the identification of me. But the identification is necessary to live in this world. Just like, a football helmet, and shoulder pads are necessary for the game of football in order to survive on the field. So it's necessary, but that's not who we are.
I see exactly what you're saying. When I look at identification, I guess I look at it from a perspective of, wow, each of us all over the world are identifying with certain characteristics that we have grown up with, seen in movies, seen on television, heard on, radio, whatever. And so we have these ideas of ourselves. So on the grand scheme of things, you can see, wow, somebody on the other side of the world in a totally different country, speaking a totally different language with different traditions, etc. They're experiencing their ups and downs of life in a whole different way than I am. So I'm looking at all this, and they identify in a different way than I do. So when I see this, I'm like, wow, we all carry these little forms of identities with us, and we all live our life by that identity. So it's like kind of like always having a mask on, and being on this stage, playing in this play. So when you can see that we all have these identities we're associating with, we can detach from that and become aware of what's going on. And so we see, wow, I have been trapped in this identity of a Catholic, middle class, whatever
religion or whatever sector you're from,
exactly.
whether rich, poor, doesn't matter.
But you see what I mean? So you can see these self-created identities that roles essentially that we play in our heads, and then we succumb to it. Oh, I'm this. I was raised this. No. What you were raised, this is a series of stories and ideas that you are carrying with you and saying is you, that it's not. You can take a step back from that, and you can become aware of, wow, this is how the majority of the world functions. They stay within these roles, these identities, and we don't ever step outside of it to see, oh my goodness, I'm not just this, or that.
Yeah. And right now with social media, we have a great opportunity to actually expand across lines. And what I mean is no other time in history where we can actually know or come to understand another culture without actually leaving our house or the borders of our country. We can go online and chat with somebody in Indonesia or what have you. And even if you don't speak the language, you could have a translator or just simply watch the culture. And we watch it. It's interesting because we interact with people. Again, when I go into the interaction with an identification that I'm better than them, I'm equal to them, I'll get that result. So if I'm better than them, I'm actually going to look for their faults. If I'm equal to them, I'm going to look for their strengths.
Similarities.
Yeah, similarities, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as I go into that, depending on the mindset I go into, because that's as I expand my identification, if I start to learn to identify with everyone around me. Now, I don't try to take the whole world on at once. But just your everyday life, you go into the grocery store and you run into someone, if you're standing in front of someone at the line, I'm not saying go out of your way, you look like a crazy person, start saying hi to everyone. But if you're in line with someone and just simply say hi, give them attention, because why are they there in front of us? Not to get too deep into the universal laws of why that person were put there and you're missing an opportunity. You'll go crazy with that way of thinking. But yet, if you just interact and expand your identification onto them as if they were a brother or a sister and treat them that way, if you could learn to look at and talk to a human being that you've never met before as if they were a family member, you're expanding your identification onto them and back onto you. And then you start to learn more. And this is what we call expanding the identification, is who am I? Well, identify, well, that isn't somebody I know, so I ought not to talk to them. Where did we learn this? As kids, don't talk to strangers. Why? Because we don't know what they're about. So we were created to shelter, and a lot of the issues that we do have is because of that. And so if you have that issue of identification in a very limited way, and then you become empowered, you can be a very dangerous human being, because then you have the ability to strength over other people. But it's only when we start to expand our identification and can see ourselves in everyone and then become empowered with knowledge, we then expand to a higher place, one of not destruction, but one of collaboration.
I see what you're saying. If we're so narrowly identified with this, and that, then we discount everything else. We say,
conquer,
this is not good. Mm-hmm. This is not like, this doesn't fall into what my idea of correct or right is.
Yeah. And we were taught this, kids in school are taught to get as high a grade as they can, and it's always based on the other kids in the class. So if you're in a class of 28 kids and you find out that you did the worst on the test, you're the 28th in the class, and the kid at the top. So we already set this system up. It's throughout the world. It's not just here in the United States in the West. It's throughout the world. And we already create that. We create boys against girls. Boys are stronger than the girls. They're faster and all this other type of stuff. And it's a narrative. It's an identification thing. There is an empirical truth to it. But what happens is, in the field of that limited identification, when you study within that field of limited identification, you will find that truth. Because that's, if I'm in the basement of a building, I'll only find what's in the basement of the building, and I'll be correct. But if the building has 150 stories, there's so much more to it. But if you only think the building is a basement, you're not going to see the 150 story. You're not going to see the roof of the top of it and the skyline of the city which you're in. So you would be correct in the study of the limitation, but you're only from a limited viewpoint studying. So therefore, men are stronger than women. But that's not empirically true. And we're starting to break past that.
Well, this is littered throughout history and science, what you're saying.
Yeah.
We study things from a certain perspective, and we always find the answer for that. You know, this is why we told people cigarettes were fine during pregnancy, because we saw, this cigarette is making this woman relax during her pregnancy, and relaxation is great for the baby.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? We take these limited standpoints, we prove it true, and then we run with it.
And the truth is, like, if depending on the studies they did, but when they did that, like, I think to some belief they were truthful onto that. It did help her relax.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
But you see what I mean? For every study that gets published, you can turn around and perform that study with a different hypothesis focused on whatever outcome you are looking for, and you will find it.
Yeah, you will.
This is how it works.
Yeah.